Another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. The Legendino is in Rio, and you're ready for today's podcast, aren't you? You're well ready.
Well, as ready as I can be at 9 o'clock in the morning. That's not a good time to speak to football journalists.
You're in Rio. Do you honestly think we're going to sympathise 9 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah,
Get with
the
the
sun has
program.
woken me up. This is a big difference between football people and football journalists. Because football people, they're getting up early. You know, they're having the training sessions early. They're planning the training sessions. Football journalists, anything before noon is difficult, I think. So cut me a little bit of slack here.
Well, I'll ask our guest if he'll cut you a little bit of slack here. As always, with the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, we like to look at an iconic game from some time in the footballing firmament. And today, it's a real privilege to have a guest who was there at the time, at the moment. And also, you would argue, one of the great footballing minds across the globe, as he's coached in so many different territories. René Meulensteen, welcome to the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. Hello.
Hello, guys.
Wow. You've got a book out, and it's called United, Sir Alex and Me, which is just a pointer to... Why are you laughing, Tim?
I'm laughing because it really shows the importance of United, doesn't it? You know, from a career that has ranged far and wide. I remember seeing Carlos Queiroz give a lecture to Brazilian coaches about his career, you know, and Carlos Queiroz is another one. He's worked all over the world. And you know what? The only thing that those Brazilian coaches wanted to hear about, what was it like at Man United? What was it like working with Alex Ferguson? And so the title of René's book really does show that, you know, United have that international pull. One of the things, René, that Queiroz stressed was the continuity of Ferguson year after year after, but look at the changes behind the scenes. Look at the changes that were continually going on the coaching side. How do you fit in to that story towards the end of the Ferguson reign? What do you think have been the big changes that have gone through in the way that Ferguson is thinking of football and in the way that you have to do your job as coach to his team?
I think you have to go back to the time when I joined Manchester United in 2001. That again is already testament for the way that Sir Alex looked at the club and looked at every department of the club, including youth development, because within the club, there was a different kind of academy setup. They had to, they had to live up to certain rules and conditions. But one of the things that they thought they fell short on was the technical development at grassroots level. So they start looking for a coach in England, you know, to see who could fill that job, but they couldn't find anybody. And through a contact of mine that I got to know by doing those courses in England, Dave Richardson, you know, United knocked on their door and said, listen, we are looking for this technical coach. We can't find anybody. Do you know anybody, or can you recommend anybody? So Dave said, yeah, I know anybody. I know somebody. It's René Meulensteen. He's a Dutch guy, but he works in Qatar. Blah. But, you know, he knows all the things about technical development. He's very well informed about curve coaching and everything. So he's the guy that I would recommend. So cut a long story short, I met Les Kershaw, the academy manager at that time, which was great. And I stayed at Dave Mackay's house, the legendary Scottish player that played for Tottenham Hotspurs and won the league.
Did he pick you up by the lapels as he once did to Billy Bremner?
You know, like Billy Bremner would have stuff. No, he didn't. Yeah. But he did. I have to say, we used to go and play. Dominoes in his house all the time, and he would use to lock the door. And you know, put the key in his rope and say, "Listen, nobody leaves this apartment until I've won the game." You know, when he was sipping on a straw on a big, you know, on a pint glass of white wine. I always remember that. But Dave was great, and the reason why I mentioned that, because Dave was actually quite instrumental for me eventually get to Man United, because obviously Les Kershaw mentioned that he had a conversation to Sir Alex Ferguson, and Dave, when he found out that I had these meetings, he rang Sir Alex and said, listen, I've worked with this boy. René Meulensteen and I can recommend him as a coach and as a person. So that put a lot of weight on the plate of Sir Alex. And he's obviously rang me. But the funny story was that Dave was checking up on me to see whether Sir Alex actually rang me. I was still, I was coaching Al Sadd, managing Al Sadd in Qatar at the time. And he rang me up and he says, "Hi, René, it's Dave here." He says, "Has Sir Alex rang you?" And I started laughing. I says, "No, he hasn't." He says, "But I've just hung up on Prince Charles." He was at the time when he started sounded annoyed. I said, "Yeah, but Dave, listen, last time when I was at your house, I told you Qatar added a number to the sequence and an extra 5 after the country code. That must be it." And indeed, 2 minutes later, or 5 minutes later, Sir Alex rang me. And I had him 20 minutes on the phone. And eventually, again, it all turned out to be that I got the job as skills development coach. Now, why do I tell this? Because at the end of the first year, I had a meeting with Sir Alex on a Friday afternoon. We had about 3 hours. And it was all about he was tapping into my sort of brain, how I saw the future. And by doing that, what I did with him, I had three flip charts papers. And I'd drawn a timeline of when he joined Manchester United and all the success he's had up to then. That was like, say, 2001, 2002. But now we need to look at 2002 and 10 years beyond. So how are we going to maintain that success? What does that mean for the academy? And what does it mean for the first team in terms of, making sure that we maintain that success? For the young players, the academy making sure that we can develop the players with the technical ability to meet the modern demands that is needed in 10 to 15 years' time, i.e. all those players like Rashford now, McTominay, Welbeck before, Cleverley, tons of players that went through that skill development program. But what can we add at this current squad, where I still believe you can add 1, 2 to 5% on each player on each position? What does that mean? Eventually, that means that we've got overall adding up 1% to one team, that's 10%. Or more of the team. That means you've got 10% more chance of winning games, therefore more chance of winning important games, trophies, etc. So that was my sort of conversation that I had. That's why he allowed me to eventually start working individually with players. And that's where you come in. How did that come about? Because I said, listen, if you give me the chance to work with first team players, because it's completely different than working with young players where you put the base in place. First team players, you need to work directly into the position. You need to be very position specific, very realistic to the game. But when the players buy into that, and that is one of the most important coaching aspects that I always use working with those players, I never use the word change. I would always use the word add. And my first player that I worked with was Diego Forlan. And Diego was a very, very talented, promising player. But sometimes you've got players at the wrong time, at the wrong place, because you had Ruud van Nistelrooy there. You had tons of other good players up there up front. So it was difficult for Diego to break into that first team. However, I felt where Diego fell short was the ability to create better situations for himself. He was quick. He was two-footed, but he didn't really have the ability to wrong foot opponents or go past opponents and to get himself in better shooting or crossing position. So that's the work I started doing with Diego. And when I use the word add, because when you say add, people say add is more. What is it? Show me. And Diego was the one. And then after that, other players came in. Ruud came in. Giggsy came in. Cristiano came in. Everybody sort of came in. So bit by bit, I started to influence that whole scenario. And then when Carlos eventually left, I had a little breakaway to Brøndby in Denmark, but obviously that didn't work out. And I came back as a technical coach at the first team. So I worked, let's say, half a year with Carlos with that particular team and squad. And then Carlos left, I think, for the Portuguese national team. And then it was an easy move for the manager to move Mick Phelan up as assistant manager and me as first team coach. And that gave me the perfect platform to now to bring all the individual stuff into a team setting. And that is how I sort of progressed through. Plus the fact that I've done the reserves one season as well, just before I left United in 2005, 2006. And that gave me another opportunity to implement that level of skill to enhanced the unpredictability in our attacking and forward play, because that's what was, I think, what United stood out for at that particular time.
That Forlan stuff is fascinating to me, because I saw quite a lot of him when he was coming through in Argentina with Independiente, and he just stood out for me because he was two-footed. And you know his background. His dad was an international footballer, and so that the idea of technique, you got to be two-footed, was drilled into him. But on the other hand, because he's growing up in relative wealth as a result of his dad's success, he's not an old-fashioned street footballer, and he could have been a tennis pro. You know, that was a decision that he had to make in his life.
He was a very good tennis player.
And not being an old-fashioned street footballer means that he didn't have that thing of creating situations for himself, did it? So that was the thing that you had to add to his game. So when he really takes off and becomes the star of the 2010 World Cup, part of that is you.
Well, I don't know whether it's part of me, but I'm happy if it's able. I'm very happy that I could contribute, because I remember Diego coming to me and he says, I don't know what to do really, because I can stay here or do I move away, and there's an interest. Should I stay in the Premier League? I've got interest in Spain. I can remember the conversation vividly, because I said to him, listen, what happens here is Diego, is we've worked a lot together on one-on-ones to add this to your game. The next step is for you to have to try it into game situations, and that will all not succeed straight away. You will fail, because competition comes in. You need to learn, how to work the distances to the opponents, etc., etc. But you stick through it, and then you'll find out what things works best for you. Now, if you go, the difference is that the players here at Man United know you. They know you, and they know probably a bit of the work that we are doing, so they are sort of a little bit anticipating on it. But if you go to another club, and I suggested him to go to Spain, and I think initially he went to Villarreal, and from Villarreal he went to Atletico Madrid, and then we know the season. But when he went to Villarreal, I said, when you go there as a player that they don't know that you've got this in your locker. You will be able to utilize this straight away and start implementing the simple skills first. You got a lot of success with that, and you build from there. And obviously afterwards he went to Atletico Madrid, became a very important player for them. And the funny thing was, he always used to text me and say, René, did you see my goal from Atletico Madrid or Villarreal? Did you see that move? Did you see this? Did you see that? And obviously I followed him anyway, because it was just a great guy, but it was great to see him coming off, and he became such an important player for Uruguay as well. But because the thing is this, if you got, as a footballer, in possession, you got the ability to unlock defenses with clever passing, with clever one-touch passing, with switches of play, whatever you got. But on top of that, you got also the ability to outmaneuver, outplay opponents. You're unpredictable. You're very hard to defend. That's what all world-class players show at the highest level, past and present. There's a lot of things changed in football, but that hasn't changed. Yeah, Puskas, Di Stefano, Cruyff, Beckenbauer, Best, Charlton, mention them all. They all had that attribute, because that's why they made him unpredictable in the attacking play, and that's why you couldn't defend them. And that was an element for us, which is so important, to make sure that we got that into Manchester United's team. And I think if you look back to those 6 years that I was the first team coach in Man United, with the squad that we had, that was riddled with quality. It had a lot of experience, but it had an enormous abundance of potential, with the likes of Rooney, Cristiano, Nani, Anderson, all those young players. And they were surrounded by Giggs, Scholes, Carrick, Neville, Ferdinand, Vidic, Evra. You know what I mean? It was the perfect balance. But if you think back and look back to our best games in those 6 years, they were breathtaking. I sometimes look back at them and I sit back like, bloody hell. I mean, that was, it was just pace, power, and penetration and unpredictability. These were the four things that Sir Alex wanted me to instill in that team.
The game that you...
No, you go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, the game specifically you wanted to have a look at, the one at the end of April in 2013, when United clinched the title in front of their own fans. And the one who just takes the breath away, I think perhaps people have forgotten just how good he is, or is Wayne Rooney.
Yeah.
I mean, the 3 goals there, it's a hat-trick for Van Persie, pretty much in the first half hour against Villa. But 2 of the goals, I mean, the passes from Rooney, it's like watching Gerson, a right-footed Gerson from Brazil in 1970. And I think people perhaps didn't give him full credit for the range of his talent. And just a few weeks after this, I saw him play for England here in Rio in the Maracanã against Brazil. It's when the Maracanã Stadium was reopened, ready for the World Cup. And he scored a sensational goal then, and he was sensational then. But these 2 passes that open out the field and take so many defenders out of the game.
Yeah. That one, to be fair, came straight from the training ground on Thursday night. In lead up to the game, I remember we worked on it, obviously during the training, but after training, I picked Van Persie and Chicharito as the 2 strikers. I picked Scholes and Rooney as the 2 midfielders, and I had Fabio and Rafael da Silva as the 2 fullbacks. And the whole exercise was very, very simple, because I would feed the ball into one of the fullbacks. The two sixes, Rooney and Ronaldo, Rooney and Scholes would cross over. So one would go away, the other one would pick up the ball. At the same time that ball was played, the 2 strikers would cross over and make those runs on the blind side of the fullbacks, on the centre backs, which were like 2 mannequins. That was all it was. But it was all about cues. So recognizing the cues, when for the sixes to come and when for the strikers, to peel off again the blind side. Because one of the centre backs was Ron Vlaar, the Dutch international, and Robin knew him very, very well. And he knew him because he trained with him in the national team. And he said the one problem he struggles with is balls over the top, diagonal balls on the blind side, because he's very much a ball-orientated defender. But it's that small window. Robin was always that player that I felt I needed to do a lot of work with our players to making sure that they understood that the window that Van Persie created was a split second. You needed to recognize that if you waited just a slightly too long, it was gone. Because Robin was not a sprinter. Robin was a glider. He glided in position. You know what I mean? He was like, if you see him, he wasn't slow, but if you see him, let's say, sprinting, I wouldn't call it sprinting. It was just like he was just gaining speed by gliding in positions. But for me, it was to find that connection from the back players and the midfield players. These are the cues. And the moment you recognize the cues, that ball has to go. And that ball that Rooney played was, honestly, it came straight from the training ground that Thursday night. And that's why, you look at each other and you look at each other after the game and you think, well, brilliant.
Yeah, well, although having said that, that those passes might have come from the training ground, but the finishes were sublime. I personally think they were out of this world. Robin Van Persie still had a lot of work to do. And this gets me to the title of the book again. You see, I read that title in a different way from the way that Tim read it. For me, United, Sir Alex and me, it's about the umbilical link, isn't it, between somebody like Sir Alex, who very much was, I don't know, the chairman of the organization in terms of a football, and you perhaps being the managing director or whatever as first team coach, that there is there's an umbilical link between you that if either side isn't working together, aren't united, there will be no and me. The and part is the Manchester United. That's the conjunctive. When you're united, this person and that person, the result is Manchester United. Just like when we're talking about these 3 goals, amazing goals, all of them. If Wayne Rooney isn't there, then does Van Persie score a goal like that? I'm not so sure. And what you've been doing, René, is explaining the million different components that go into winning a football game. When people look at that Manchester United team, we're not thinking about what you're talking about. We're not thinking that, you had to put these pieces together to make this player work for the team, as it were. We're just thinking, well, Manchester United have got all the best players. That must be somewhat frustrating. In your job, you're literally crossing the T's and dotting the I's and everything. But people don't see that.
There's people who say, yeah, it's just a case of giving them the shirts and letting them get on with it.
Well, yeah, or paying a lot of money and getting all the best players.
Yeah, but I think there's plenty of examples, and it's better to look at the current game or look at the current state of certain teams. I'm not saying I don't think that Chelsea's got a bad squad, but for whatever reason, they can't get it going yet. You know what I mean? Now, there is still a lot to be done. And I think, Sir Alex always used to say to me, because we played a lot of games, most of the time through the season was 3 times a week, in the weekend, midweek, and then the weekend again, whether it was, league game, FA Cup or Champions League, and then another League Cup. He always used to say, well, a lot of managers and coaches, you always complain about, well, we haven't got really much to train. You play your game, you're in recovery, and you're preparing for the next game. But we always had this approach, no matter how little or our training time was. So Alex always used to say, listen, everything you do in training, René, will manifest itself in the game, good and bad. And so we expect a world-class performance from these players 3 times a week. They have to be able to rely on a world-class support on and off the pitch, leading up to those games. And that was my merit. I was making sure that every training session that we did was maximized, in terms of purpose, that players understood the purpose of the session. But always a challenge, because good players, elite players, they always like to be challenged. And that challenge can come in many different ways, shape, and forms. And all our sessions revolved around 2 key things: intensity and quality. They are interlinked. So as close as you can get that to match situations, the better it is. If you tick those 4 boxes, players will enjoy it. Because never forget, even these are elite players and make tons and tons and tons of money. You have to go back to the core, why they started playing in the first place. And 99% of that is because of the love of the game. The love of the game and the passion for the club. And that love, that passion, you need to try to feed that every time. And in many ways, it's like it's the same way of every day, every person in the world has to eat, but if you eat, the same thing every single day, after 4 or 5 days, you get fed up. So you have to eat, but you want to make sure you've got a good diet, and it's different. It's meat, it's fish, it's vegetables, it's salads, it's all different, and it's the same with training. Train the same things, but in a different way. That is the key to making sure that everybody stays excited about coming to training.
I saw Carlos Queiroz telling Brazilian coaches that at the start of his time with United, he was a bit lost because he wasn't getting any feedback. Ferguson was so hands-off, and he was a little bit lost. And he went to Ferguson and said, I'm not sure. And Ferguson took him out to a meal and said, Carlos, you're doing a great job. If you weren't, we would be telling you about it.
It's funny that you say that, Tim, because that's honestly, that is so true. Although Carlos' approach was different from mine, in that respect, I have to say, because Carlos was much more measured, calmer in that respect. And you learn as you go along. And I felt with those players of such a high intelligent level, I didn't need to instruct them too much during those sessions in terms of a stop, stand still scenario. I knew from those players, when you get going, you keep it going, you keep speed in the train, you keep a flow, because the players hated it every time you're going to go stop, stand, this, that. I've learned from that to make sure that my information was given before the training and in between different topics of sessions. So I would pick up players individually. So there was a nice flow, keep going the flow to the game. And I think, I don't know, and the same with Carlos, but I've must have given, I don't know how many sessions in those 6 years. And the biggest compliment for me, Tim, has always been that never, ever one player ever came to me after training and said, this was absolutely utter, rubbish. You know what I mean? I didn't enjoy it at all. So it was always making sure that you cover those 4 things, that players understand, we work, and the aim is to every time to give the players individually the opportunity to become better. or the team to become better? That's the question. And my question was always leading up to the game: are these boys prepared? Do they know everything they need to know? And are they prepared? Do they know how to win the game? That's all what I've always asked. And don't overcook it. We didn't overcook it with meetings and video stuff and all that. We did what we had to do, but it was always short, sharp, concise. Because I know from experience that if you drag it on too long, you lose the players. Information just gets, and you have to understand that people learn and take information in different ways. So it's better to drip feed them, and it was like a matter of making sure that you constantly change that environment of when you sell that information, whether it's in the pitch, whether it's individual, etc. But all together is the moment that those players stepped over the line, they were ready to go and play.
So one thing it's long fascinated me, because I've been away for a long time. I left England in 1994, and back then English football was basically British players with the occasional Scandinavian.
Yeah.
But a side like the United side that you're working with, they're multinational and multicultural and so on. And you are working in a second language, although your English is so incredibly good. There's not much trace of a Dutch accent in there. But still, it's a second language. I know from doing media in Brazil, a second language is always a second language.
Yeah.
How are you doing it when you've got, say, big player for United, big player in this game? I saw him come up. Antonio Valencia from Ecuador, who I don't think spoke a great deal of English. Certainly he didn't do it in public. You had Anderson for a while. I'm not sure how do you get these players from all four corners of the world? How do you get them singing from the same song sheet?
Well, with these players, and Antonio, you have to look at every person brings his own personality. If you look, for instance, the two that you mentioned, Anderson and Valencia, Anderson was very extrovert, outspoken, bubbly character. Wasn't great in his English in that respect, and Antonio was by far more introvert. But the most important thing is to making sure that you first and foremost address them in the comfort zone. And I always felt, I lived and worked in Qatar for many years as well, for 8 years, Tim. And the first thing I did, I learned the football language in their language, because it's universal. It's always the same things. Come here, listen, sit, left, right, pass, shoot, back, defend, attack, whatever. All those words. So you build that vocabulary as quick as you can. And I did that exactly in certain words in Portuguese and certain words in Spanish. So if I could say certain things, I would say to Antonio, ¿entiendes? ¿Comprende? That he knows. Oh no, although somewhere down the line, we'll find a way to communicate. And if I wanted to do some special work with him, I made sure that I've learned enough of those Spanish words that I wanted to get across, that I could use them, even though it was maybe a little bit staccato language, you know what I mean? But he would get it across. You know what I mean? If I would get it across to him, he would understand. He would learn a bit of English as well at the same time. And that is how I approached it. And the players appreciated that. Because if they see that you put an effort in, that you want to try to, speak their language, they always get a little bit of, enjoyment out of it as well, because it creates laughter automatically because you say something silly or stupid. And you always try to put a little bit of a silly sentence in there. You know what I mean? That people say, oh, you know what I mean? So, and yeah, that's how you do it. And but yeah, so as long as the roles are clear, that then it's important, because if they feel they are, they're swimming a little bit in the open, they don't know exactly what's expected, then they're not sure about the decisions they make. So, but with Carlos it was easy, because Carlos spoke obviously perfectly Portuguese, and I think also Spanish and all that. Those were his better languages, but no, we managed to. And then I always say, players help each other. Cristiano and with Nani and with Anderson and all of them, you make sure you help each other. I mean, look at the most the best known trio that we had in Patrice Evra and Ji-sung Park and Carlos Tevez. You can't bring players further apart from the world, and they were the best of mates. And Carlos wasn't that great in English, and G was sort of, coming up. And then you had Pat linking everything together. But they were the three amigos. They were fantastic together. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, there were a few.
I find that fantastic. That's heartwarming. There's hope for humanity.
Because there were a few, I think there were a couple, at least, three amigos in Manchester United at the time, because Wayne Rooney and Cristiano Ronaldo and one more person, maybe Ryan Giggs or something like that. I seem to remember one time when Cristiano got his first supercar and they're all, driving along the road to make sure he didn't crash or whatever.
Well, he did. He did one day. There's a funny story. He did one day crash the car in the airport tunnel. I don't know whether you heard about that. And Adrian van der Sar was the one coming from behind, so he stopped.
That's right.
He got Cristiano in the car, and they brought him up to Carrington, and obviously everybody was taking a mickey. And the one thing that they were saying was that Cristiano was complaining to the police that the wall was not the right distance.
Yeah, we've all used that one. It never works. René, there is an obvious glaring question that we will come to during the course of this conversation, I think, which is what on earth has happened to Manchester United since your day?
And could you feel it then?
Yeah. But
because the Glazers have already taken over, haven't they? So could you feel, and you right at the start, you talked about plan for 10, 15 years in the future. Could you feel this moment, April 2013, when Ferguson is just about to go and he's signing off winning the title, could you feel that there was a decline in the air?
I wouldn't call it decline. Because that's in hindsight. I would have felt that there were changes coming, which I, how do you say it, questioned what kind of consequences that they would bring to the club, and one of them could be decline. So the one thing that I've always felt for a club the size of Manchester United, and I had this conversation, it's written in the book as well. I had this conversation with David Gill in 2010, I think it was, or 2011, when we were on pre-season in Malaysia. And we had a coffee in the morning and we sat there and just talking away. And I said to David at one point, I said, your biggest challenge is to manage Manchester United beyond the departure of Sir Alex Ferguson. And you need to sort of think, you need to have a succession plan ready, because every successful organization is built on two components. Well, there's a few components, obviously, because everybody needs to have, it all starts with culture and identity. That is what Sir Alex built over the years, over those 26 years period, and then you need to have a vision, how do you want to be successful over the short, medium and long term, on and off the pitch. You need to devise the strategies to put in place, and you need to have the right people with expertise and experience to making sure that's going to happen. Now, all based on that is two components, stability and continuity. Yeah, the stability is created by all those people who've been there for a long time. Sir Alex Ferguson, David Gill, all the staff that he's had, and the continuity has to do with that vision I talked about in terms of short, medium, long term. Now, the moment that Sir Alex Ferguson, one of the biggest components, is going to leave, you need to have something ready to making sure that stability is not completely going to go boom. You know what I mean? So that was my question to David. Now, what happened was that David decided to leave even before Sir Alex. And they had to announce it because they had to inform all the shareholders. And that was basically one of the reasons in terms of, okay, where's the club going in terms of their, the brand management, the commercial side of the things and all this and that and the other. So, see, before that time, the Glazers were very much happy to sort of sail on Sir Alex Ferguson's and David Gill's compass because they were winning. They took that winning for granted. That's normal. That's Man United. We're going to win. We're always going to win. But I think they miscalculated the importance that Sir Alex had with everybody that was involved with that stability and that continuity, that when that sort of starts to leave and break down, you're not going to get that success. And when you don't get that success, it's very hard to get it back. And that is what we've seen over those 10 years. So I wouldn't say necessarily, because if they would have had the right succession plan and they would have put the right person in place, then I think that person could have actually sailed on Sir Alex Ferguson's path and probably carried on being successful. And I think they completely took the wrong course, which obviously in hindsight is easy to say. And now, you know, it is hard for every manager that has been there so far, because nobody really has ticked all the boxes. And, you know, we still have to see whether, you know, Eric, who is doing, is working his socks off to making sure that he is trying to get it. But we're only, what is it, five games in the league? Is it 5 games or something, or 6? And we are already 9 points behind. You know what I mean? So people not even, and that is what United should always be about, challenging for the Premier League title. You know,
so what do you think they should have done when Ferguson left?
Well, I said to David, there's only 2 ways to do it. There's only you manage it from within. There's 2 tracks from within, that making sure that you have good discussions with Sir Alex to say, listen, I know you want to step down at some point, but you're not walking out the front door just yet. You're going to be part of that transition. We're going to identify the right people, the right persons, to making sure that it's limited influences apart from you leaving, but really a really gradual changeover. And who that was be, whatever. That could have been somebody from within, or really somebody that has the credentials to manage a club of the size of Manchester United. You know, and it could have been a Pep Guardiola, who was, you know, away on the sabbatical, or a club that they've spoken to and he hasn't come, or maybe an Ancelotti, you know, like those sort of guys. If you look for really big guns, there's not too many around. Or are you really confident with Sir Alex to bring somebody from within that has been with you all the time, you know, an ex-player that goes through it, that has the coaching credentials that you think, but he's been supported by the same supportive mechanisms as you have, and you are still there. So basically, you still manage it, you move yourself to the background slightly, and the other guy just slightly comes to the forefront. And when we feel the time is right, there's have been hardly any changes taking place. People haven't even noticed. And then suddenly, you know, you say, listen, this is the time now that this guy is taking place. The other track was going from outside, which means that Sir Alex Ferguson does leave. The Glazers, whoever in play, they take over. The decision-making people are now different sort of people, which ended up with being at Woodward. And obviously, then they bring people in from outside, and then straight away, there's a big risk that stability and continuity is going to be, you know, at risk, because managers do like to bring their own people in. That is exactly what David Moyes did, because, you know, he had the feeling of he wanted to do his way with his people, and that's fair enough, because people can do that. But then you have to realize that the consequences will be, you know, that stability and continuity that has been there and built by Sir Alex over 26 years, which basically established that culture and identity where United stood for, is now at risk. And I think if you look back to those last 10 years, I think they've lost that culture and identity completely.
I know you're United, Sir Alex and me. However, does Sir Alex have to take some blame in that? I mean, I love the guy. Trust me, I've met the guy once and he was a perfect gentleman. I think I met him on the day that he was taking the same train down from Manchester with me to go and see Andy Murray win Wimbledon that year on a Sunday afternoon, very hot Sunday afternoon. But I went up to him and I said, look, Sir Alex, you know I don't support you lot, but I've got to shake your hand. And he was quite, you know, chuffed. He was quite a gentleman towards me. So I'm not criticizing him. However, given the almost perfection of his role at Manchester United, you know, which sees him now holding lectures for business people on how to, you know, run an organization. As you pointed out, Manchester United by now aren't just a football club, like every football club now, but in those days they were like an organization. They were like you know, a top what do you call it, a FTSE 1000 company or whatever.
And a big player in the global entertainment industry
as well. Yeah, indeed. And he, as I understood it, David Moyes was his anointed choice. And now, if that's wrong, then I have to apologise. But if David Moyes was his anointed choice and the Manchester United board kind of went with David Moyes without the kind of scrutiny that you're alluding to here, what's the relationship between this new person and his team and the continuity of Manchester United? Does Sir Alex have to take some blame? Because he could have said, no, this is the way I want David Moyes to come in here, or somebody else to come in here. But it seemed to me that he sort of said, no, he's the man, and now I'm off.
No, I wouldn't say, to blame him. Absolutely not, because I think those conversations with them, like, I wasn't part of it. I just tried to paint the picture from me as being part of Sir Alex Ferguson's team, seeing what's happening with United, thinking, in my opinion, what would have been the best way forward to safeguard that success for the longer term. I've never been in any conversations. I'm sure that David and the manager and David Gill and Ed Woodward and all the other ones, in the Glazer camp, have had those conversations, and the outcome was that David was the one that was coming in. You know what I mean? And again, hindsight is the easiest thing in the world, because you can look back and then say, yeah, it didn't work out, so you should have never suggested him. I also do think that Sir Alex never thought that David would have changed that whole backroom staff, because I think, as far as the conversations that we had, they were very adamant that saying, no, listen, we know how important you guys have been. We've had good conversations with David to understand that. And that is probably what we're going to happen. That was sort of the initial message that we got. When the weeks went by and the conversations took place, it ended up that it wasn't the case. So in that respect, it was David who took his own responsibility after being appointed to go in that direction. And you can't obviously blame Sir Alex for that, because I'm sure that he has advised him in the best possible way. So that's where it is.
You've worked there with some really, really special players, which I imagine challenges you as well as a coach, because you've said the word, I want to add. Was there anyone there who was so special that you couldn't add anything? It was all there. And what is it about the special players that makes them special?
Tim, nobody ever is a finished article. And if you don't add as a player, or in the way you play, you can always add as a person. Because as a young player, like you said, when we're young, you view things differently when you are, older, or you're getting experienced. And sometimes if you get very wise advice from somebody that is older at a very young age, you can take advantage of that, because why would you have to invent the wheel if somebody's already done it for you? So there's always something, I think, because there's always that strive. Look, the reason why, for instance, Cristiano is still doing what he's doing at the age of 38 is because he has got that how do you best describe that unsatisfying desire to always get the maximum out of himself. His challenge is now, he knows that he's not 28 anymore, he's 38, but he's still finding ways, to add to him whatever it is, to still get that, performance there, to still score those goals. You know what I mean?
From outside, it looks like insanity. It looks like someone who's almost incapable of being happy. Who has to always add more and more and more.
I think it is, but it is that, he's also, I think, in a situation, that obviously the exit door, like when you are like in your 20s, you can't even see the light of the exit door, the sign. It's so far ahead. Now, no matter where it is, but there's something in the background there, some light shining through, and the closer he gets, in years to come, it will say, exit. And is that in 1 year, 2 years, 3 or 4 years time, he will keep going. as long as he can, because he can't think of the idea of, what do you call it, leaving that game he's loved so much behind. It's interesting, because I've always said I don't see Cristiano being a guy that will leave, the landscape of football like a dying candle, because I always feel that if he doesn't feel that he can't score goals anymore, that he can't be important anymore, that's probably the time for him to then say, listen, now I'm gonna direct my energy somewhere else, wherever that might be. But whatever he's gonna do after he stops as an active player, that energy will just transform to something else. Whether it's going to be in football or management, whether it's going to be supporting his kids, whether it's going to be whatever it is, that's just the person he is.
Maybe the opposite to this, perhaps, is Anderson. Now, I saw Anderson coming up. I remember him in the World Under-17 Cup, and he was extraordinary. And he had this sustained pace that made him very hard to mark. Yeah, and he suffered an injury before he came to United, and he suffered an injury, and he never had that pace again. And there were, from afar, always looked like he didn't want it. He wasn't prepared to be Cristiano Ronaldo, to the sacrifices that Cristiano Ronaldo is prepared to make for greatness.
Yeah.
So what's it like working with someone like that, who maybe has the potential to be special, but doesn't have? What can you do about that? What did you try to do about that?
It is purely an intrinsic matter for starters, because the intrinsic motivation for Cristiano Ronaldo is on 100. That's the highest you can get. It's on 100, and it will always be on 100. Whereas the intrinsic motivation for Anderson and maybe some other players, they're not on 100. And they might not even be on an 80. They might not even, they see it as a different kind of way. He saw that, and that is obviously what happens a lot, and you probably know that. A lot of Brazilian footballers are just playing professional football, to create a better life for themselves and the families around them. There's plenty of examples of that. And obviously, but Anderson, and that is the thing, because at the end of the day, the evidence is always in, how often are you then going to be picked in the starting lineup? And if you look at, for instance, with Anderson, he's played plenty of games, but there's been plenty of games that he's been left out. And you question, because there was a little bit of lack of discipline, and that lack of discipline that's shown through in a little bit, like you said, the professionalism, to be really get the best out of themselves. That showed also a little bit through in the way that we wanted to play, defensively, not always doing the job that was required. You know what I mean? And but he was sort of this typical bubbly guy that, he would say, you ask him, he says, listen, I should play every game. But yeah, with that comes a consequence. And if you can not live up to that consequence in terms of making sure your lifestyle is the best, your training is the best, your whatever is the best, then probably you're not going to play every game. You know what I mean? And that those are the challenges you always like. At the end of the day, there was no hiding place at Manchester United amongst that squad team, because they were so self-regulating. Because the players themselves would dig each other out. You know what I mean? The senior player, come on, Ando, come on, or whoever it was, they would motivate each other. We need you. You know what I mean? You want to be part. You want to leave a legacy. You just don't want to be a Manchester United player and then leave Manchester United and everybody forgets about you. You want to leave a mark. And those motivational things would you hope it would trigger something in those players. And at times in games you could really see that talent shining through.
The ones who are really motivated, they can provide problems of their own. And I remember I worked with Rio Ferdinand a few years ago, and off the air we're having a chat, and he's saying both of those Champions League finals against Barcelona, tactically, we got everything wrong. That was his opinion.
Mm-hmm.
how do you, because one of the big tasks of the coach, you got to persuade the players that the strategy is correct.
Yeah.
And the players, they're entitled to have their own opinions. So how can that be a problem when you got someone as clever and as important as Rio Ferdinand, who clearly didn't believe in the strategy?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I can't judge on that comment and on that conversation, because the end of the day, if you look back to those two Champions League finals, I think the one in Rome was by far closer than the one in Wembley, where I think we lost it in the first 50 minutes of the second half. But I don't think necessarily, see, in hindsight, and you lose games, then it's easy to then say the strategies, we got everything wrong. Do not forget that at that particular time, the team with Pep Guardiola was in the ascendancy, you know, with all the players coming through. He had a clear way how we wanted to play and all that. And we knew we had to throw something at them. And the key was to making sure that, you know, we wanted to give them something that initially they don't like doing, which is defending. So therefore, first of all, when you get the ball, you need to be able to keep it, you know, and making sure that you hit the right areas and right players that you can threaten them with, which we did in the early parts of the game, in both games, because I think we should have taken the lead in both games. And as you know, games change games. But the thing is that as well is that do not underestimate, obviously, the fact that they had another world-class player in Messi there, and then topped by all the other ones with Xavi and Iniesta and Puyol and Piqué and all of them. So they had a very talented squad. I don't think that necessarily it was the game decided by tactics rather than probably maybe individual errors at times. You know, because if you look back to the Wembley game, it was Edwin van der Sar's last game, you know, and I think it's fair to say that it wasn't the best game of his career, never mind for Manchester United. But like I said, again, that game, we should have gone ahead in that game. We didn't. We then lose a goal because we were open. The tactical plan was making sure stay nice and compact, let them play around you, no problem, let them cross the ball, because who's going to head it in? How do they score? Is a pass through the middle, you know, and a good finish. Then you can question the rest of it. The second half, then we come back to 1-1 through Wayne Rooney, you know, which was good. And then in half time, where you really needed to address the fact that, listen, this is a game where we need to get through the next 20 minutes or 25 minutes. We don't concede. We're in a very good space because we got by far better and different players to bring on that can make us stronger. They don't have that type of substitutes. But we knew from a strategy and a trend that Barcelona would always go for the throat in the early parts of the second half. And for whatever reason, you know, we weren't at the races when we came out of the dressing room. You know, there was a little bit of a debate going on and talk and chat about, you know, the goal we conceded and da-da-da-da-da. But rather than saying, listen, let's focus and let's get through this, because then the last 20, 25 minutes, we make it our own. But then we've already conceded those two goals. And Barcelona at that time, I think, were already a few levels ahead from Barcelona, from Rome. So we never could be able to go back. Then, and there's nothing to do and nothing to compare because the occasions and everything is completely different. 2 months later, we played them again in Washington in the pre-season. And we've asked the players directly, if you guys still believe that this is the way forward to play against Barcelona, yeah, these tactics and strategies, do we believe in them? Then we should execute them exactly. We had slightly different personnel, but we did. We stuck to exactly the same things. But now what we did do, we did give them problems and we did take our chances and we win the game. So people always you have to understand, Tim, that when people lose big games, it is the emotion that will a lot of times blur their, you know, objective opinion. And in hindsight, you're disappointed, this, that, you know, you start to pull fingers. It doesn't really matter. You know, it is what it is. But I can understand the frustration because you have to always think to yourself as players, coaching staff as well, how often do you get an opportunity to win a Champions League? But it's fine margins. But I always remember in Washington, it's a funny story, I bumped into Pep Guardiola in the corridor He was just waiting because we had an hour before the game, and I set up, and so I bumped into him. And I got to meet Pep Guardiola I don't know exactly what year it was, but he was at that particular time having a trial at Man City. And that must be early 2000s. And I had a player, that I brought over from Qatar to show, what you can achieve with that skill development training. So he was sort of already 18 years of age. And anyway, he was at City at the time as well. And I went every day just to see how he was for a coffee. And I met up with Pep because he was sitting there together talking. So I had a good chat with Pep there and then, and we talked about how influential Johan Cruyff was on him and his methods, and how influential it was on me, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So years and years and years later, we see each other again in those corridors of the stadium. And I went up to him and says, Pep, you probably don't remember me, but we met each other at the Marriott Hotel around the airport then and then and then. He says, yes. And then we spoke about Johan Cruyff, and we spoke about curve and development and what you've done. And I have to say, listen, chapeau, because you've achieved everything you said what you're going to do, and the way that you play. And, looking back to the last Champions League final, he says, yes, one thing, René, I have to say. If Messi would have gone in your team second half, we swapped him around with whatever player, I can guarantee you guys would have won the Champions League. That's how good he was. And yes, on top of that, I had, Xavi and Iniesta, but you guys had very good players as well. And you stick a player of that caliber in your team, makes a hell of a difference. I thought that was an interesting comment from him to make.
It's very hard to imagine Guardiola at any stage in his career being an assistant. No, he's the top man. He wants to do it his way. In your case, you've had the top job at clubs all around the world. You've also been assistant and first team coach. They're very different jobs, aren't they?
Yeah.
What's your dream job?
What's your dream job? To be fairly honest, the dream job that I had was the one that I had at Manchester United when I was first team coach, because I felt I could do everything really what you want to do as a head coach without really having to deal with all the negativity surrounding it, because that's what Sir Alex took care of.
Yeah, Alex very hands off, lets you do it. And takes responsibility.
My passion was on the pitch, training with those players, just getting prepared for the next game, and then sit back and just watch them, and get excited about it and watching them play. So that was definitely my dream job. I loved every minute of it, Tim. And like I said, if a club is the club of the size of Manchester United and all the other clubs, but for us, it revolves around those things. Those clubs, they have the highest of ambitions. Yeah, they want to win the Premier League, go as far as they can in the Champions League, FA Cup, League Cup, whatever club trophies on show. But Premier League are those priorities. Now, to meet those ambitions, you have to have high expectations. And with those expectations and ambitions comes pressure. And that is the interesting thing, because to meet those expectations, you need to set high standards on and off the pitch for the players, for the staff and everything. And to be able to meet those standards, people need to take the responsibility. That's how it works. Bang, 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 bang. But the funny thing is, with all that, in all those 6 years, and all those ambitions and expectations and standards, responsibilities, I've never felt any moment of negative pressure. Never once. Never once I drove from my house to Carrington and I thought, oh, I don't want to see the bus today because I'm going to get this and a Roller King and all that. Nothing, never. We were always nice. And that was purely down to Sir Alex Ferguson's man management during the day. I never felt uneasy or not at ease. I never felt that we were not doing the right thing. Yes, there were discussions and really good conversations about things, but we never got carried away. We never got carried away with the highs. We never got carried away with the lows, because football revolves all around trends. And if it's not a trend, it's an incident. So don't put too much time on it. But if it's a trend, then you need to start listening. Where's the trend coming from? What's the source? And how can we fix it? That's the quickest way, to do it. And that's why it was so enjoyable. Like I said, there wasn't a day at the club that we didn't laugh. And a lot of times Sir Alex himself was the in the midst of it.
Yeah, the book is René Meulensteen, United, Sir Alex and Me, My Life in Football. We've almost run out of time, René, but just one final question, if I may, which is, who needs to apologise if Jadon Sancho is ever to play for Manchester United again? Does Ten Hag need to apologise to him or vice versa?
Well, the fact of the matter that we're already discussing this and it's open in the public domain is already where it's gone wrong. You don't discuss these things in the open domain. Obviously Ten Hag said what he said. If you ask me, should he have done it? No, absolutely not. Even though it's clear and evident that Jadon didn't train well and that's why he didn't pick him, you address that personally. You address it personally and say, listen, Jadon, I'm not going to put you on the bus today because your training is beyond the par. You need to sort it out, mate. And listen, you have to change your tune, this and that and the other. The moment you throw this in the public domain, all sort of other mechanisms start to play a role. The media, the social media. Jadon should have never reacted the way that he did, but probably it's a young kid, emotional, whatever. For me, to solve these things quickly, for everybody, for all the parties involved, act like grown man. You know, Jadon should probably put his big boots on, knock on the door and say, listen, Eric, let's resolve this. I was wrong. I shouldn't have done this. I apologize in that respect. If he's keen in getting the place back, you know, but that's the way he should forward. But I think the biggest problem for me is that you had the same scenario with Mourinho and Pogba. Week in, week out, people were discussing on the media and asking people about opinions. What do you think? What do you think? And it does add fuel to the discussion. Nobody's helped with it. But it's testament to a club where, you know, where things are not all right, because otherwise those things do not come out. You know, you deal that with in-house. The only thing is a performance that the manager has the right to pick whatever he wants from the squad to making sure that those guys are going to give him the best chance of a result, you know, and that is what he's going to be paid to do so. So all those things need to stay in-house, but that has happened by far too often with Man United.
Is this a case of Ten Hag being too Dutch?
Yeah, maybe, because in Holland, Tim, we would say that, and he would have said that with no intention, probably, with the consequences that was coming out, because we in Holland are, in general, we are very direct, very straightforward, with no hidden agendas. We never say anything to hurt people personally, but we just say it as we believe this is how it is, and there we go. So in Holland, if you would have said that about a player in Holland for Ajax, that would have been no issue. It would have not even made the papers. Yeah, okay, yeah, understand, great, move on. But it's different. It's a different culture. You need to understand that. But yeah, that is you know, that is a little bit how we are, and it's a bit of a characteristic Dutch mentality thing.
Rather too Dutch than too Nigerian. Imagine if Eric Ten Hag was Nigerian, because youngsters would be seen but not spoken, or they well, anyway.
Yeah, seen but not heard.
Yeah. René, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. We'll have to do this again. Once again, the book is René Meulensteen's United, Sir Alex and Me, My Life in Football. Thank you once again.
Thanks for having me on the show, guys. Absolute pleasure.
It was very Hazalic.